Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next thing we have is our sewer service rate study results, and we have Vic Cooper-Wasser and Brian Rubel here tonight to present the results of the rate study. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. It was in the fall that I think you asked us to get started with the rate study. We did that. We gathered some data. Appreciate the help of Mr. Ains and his staff in getting that to us. And just to introduce my colleague who will do most of the talking tonight, Mr. Cooper-Wasser, longtime employee of Tetra Tech, has actually made rates, municipal rates, an expertise of his. Over 40 years he has studied and implemented that and has worked in over 100 municipalities in Michigan and Ohio, Midwest, to develop rate structures. So I think this is at least the third time he has helped with Northfield's rates, and so he's very knowledgeable in this. He sits on a national committee for the American Water Works Association to develop standards for rate studies. So you are in very good hands tonight with Mr. Cooper-Wasser's work. And with that, I'm going to let him talk about that, and I'm going to turn the slides and be here for backup. So. Nick?
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Paul.
Well, good evening, everyone.
You need to have that right up to your mouth. Okay,
Can you hear
good.
me now? That better?
Or speak louder.
So this is an update to our last cost of service study on the wastewater rates. And I want to move on to the agenda. So there's a list of the agenda items. Starting off with the bold opinion, what is a cost of service rate study, the customer types that you have, assumptions that we've made, and we've calculated baseline rates, and we've calculated baseline rates plus what the impact would be if a $3 million storage tank were to be built. We've also calculated what the rate would be if that tank were built and a $3 million trunk sewer were built. There's also a discussion on system development charges. The system development charge is your connection fee. And then potential decisions to be made and questions. So let's go to the next slide. The Bolt opinion. When it comes to rates here in Michigan, well, there is a legal precedent that we try to follow in terms of the guidance of the Bolt versus Lansing opinion, that there's a three-part test to determine a valid user fee. It should be regulatory, it should be proportional to the necessary cost of the service, and it should be voluntary. Users must be able to refuse or limit the use of the service. Now, most rates in communities and system development charges already comply with tests 1 and 3. However, what a rate study does is it memorializes the proportionality, item 2 of this requirement, that you can't just set a rate arbitrarily. And what a cost of service rate study does is it documents compliance with the second requirement. So what is a cost of service rate study? In this case, we cover a 5-year period. That is the study period, FY 18-19 to 22-23. We first determine the revenue required to cover O&M expenses, equipment replacement, capital outlays not debt financed, and debt service. We estimate the total billable flow. We calculate rates for metered customers, calculate rates for quarterly fixed customers per REU, and we look at the rate impacts of funding the capital improvement options that we discussed. So the next slide is the customer types. There are 14 customers that are billed on a per 1,000 gallon used basis. 3,416 customers that have billed a flat rate charge per residential equivalent unit per quarter. Next slide. So baseline rates. The assumption on baseline rates that growth would be 5 REUs per year during this period, no loss of existing customers or no loss of existing billable flow for metered customers, inflation 3% general, 10% for hospitalization, and construction of no major capital projects. So with those assumptions, we looked at calculating rates in 2 ways. One way is what we call the just-in-time approach, where there is a calculated rate with an annual adjustment based on the revenue required that year. And that's what you're seeing here. So currently, the rate for an REU per quarter is $84. And under this approach, it would go up to $87, a $3 increase in July, and then increase accordingly in future years. There's a slight dip in the last year under this method because we're basically just taking expenses each year and what the rate has to be for that year. So we have a dip in expenses that last year.
Mr. Cooper-Wasser, that last year, one of our bonds are being paid off. Is that the reason that there's the dip in the last year?
That sounds right.
Okay, that's my understanding. Thank
So
you.
on a theoretical basis, strictly looking at the numbers, these are the results. When it comes to customers that are billed on a metered basis, currently they are billed $5.60 for every 1,000 gallons of water used. That would go up to $5.80 July 1, and then increase accordingly in the future years. The other method is for the flat rate customers is to say, okay, what would the rate need to be if we wanted to have one adjustment in July and not change anything for the next 5 years? Theoretically, mathematically, what would it need to be to cover our expenses over 5 years? So we took that approach, looked at what the result would be, and the rate would be $90.20 per quarter, and that would not change for the next 5 years, based on the current usage and the current expenses and projections of current expenses, and also with the construction of no major capital projects. On the metered rate side, taking the same approach, it would go to $6.01 in July and stay at that level for the entire 5 years. So we also looked at 2 alternatives that involve constructing capital projects, major capital projects. The first capital project is a $3 million storage tank at the wastewater treatment plant. And let's go to the next slide. So the impact of doing that on an annual adjustment basis, the rates would be adjusted according to this table. And in July, the first increase would take the rate to $101.60 under this alternative. The next slide, the impact on a metered customer, the rate would go to $6.78 July 1. The next slide, we look at the approach where we have one adjustment and the rate stays constant for 5 years. In that case, the rate would go to $104.70 in July and would remain that same number for 5 years. And that would cover the expenses of constructing a 3 million gallon storage tank at the sewage plant. And the next slide, the impact on a metered customer with a one-time adjustment, it would go to $6.98 in July and stay constant for 5 years. And then finally, we looked at the financial impact of constructing 2 major capital projects, a $3 million storage tank, and a $3 million trunk sewer. In that case, the rate July 1 would go to 116.30 cents and then be adjusted each year thereafter. For the metered customer, it would go to $7.75 and adjusted each year thereafter. Using the single rate adjustment approach for a flat rate customer, it would go to $119.20 in July and not be adjusted any further for the next 5 years. And for a metered customer, it would go to $7.95 per 1,000 gallons. So those are the results of what the rates would be projected to be, A, if there were no major capital projects. This is what we call the baseline rates. B, if a single major project was built, that's the $3 million storage tank. And then the third calculation is if 2 major capital projects were to be built. And so this shows you what the impact on rates would be. The next slide discusses the system development charge or connection fee. And the purpose of that charge is to promote equity between new and existing customers. And this goes through the methodology that we used to calculate the fee. We basically calculated the replacement value of the wastewater system divided by the capacity of the system in REUs to come up with a rate, but then deducted a credit for any outstanding bond principal that is currently being paid by quarterly rates. That's the methodology. So what we had as a result of those calculations was currently the connection fee is $5,973, and we estimate that based on the replacement value of the wastewater system today, that could be increased to a maximum of $6,255, and there would be math behind that to support that increase if you chose to do that. So some potential decisions would be, when will the township decide on rate adjustments, if any? Should the usage rates be adjusted? The method, should the usage rates be adjusted each year, or should they be a constant value where you make one adjustment in the first year and nothing for the other 4 years? And then finally, should the connection fee be increased, up to the maximum defendable number? And with that, I just open it up to questions.
Dockett.
You don't know this yet, but this township voted to get rid of 17 of the units. They're going to go on a meter here. So I don't know what that did to your study, because you said if everything is constant, this is your study. But a couple weeks ago, they decided, I didn't, but they voted to go on a meter. So I don't know how that's going to affect your deal, and I think it would be knocking it way off also the $3 million tank. We all know on this board that how they end up, probably $6 million before we're done. So I don't go along with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions down here?
Can you explain if this is going to throw your study off? 17, you're losing 17.
Our study is based on the data we had at the time.
Excuse me?
Our study is based on the data that we were provided a few months ago.
Yeah,
if the data you're talking about is very, very recent, it sounds like it wouldn't change the results appreciably.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you very good. Okay.
Okay. Ms. Check.
Under assumptions, under inflation, you've got 3% general, 10% hospitalization. Can you explain what hospitalization would be?
Okay, let me look at the detailed tables. Plus, we looked at the,
Could you please tell me what page that is?
If they're not numbered, but it's under assumptions.
They're on the bottom, on the middle, but they're really hard to
8.
read.
Yeah, it's hard to read.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, seven, sorry.
I have table 3. You were provided with the backup tables, I believe, no?
No.
The Excel spreadsheets? Well, going to the Excel spreadsheets that were done for the study, items that may have been impacted by this 10% increase in your budget, there is a line item called hospitalization. Beyond that specific line item, I can't say which others may have been impacted, but there was one line that we used 10% per year rather than 3%, only because the rate of inflation of those costs was higher than the CPI that we've been seeing.
Thank you.
Well, see, we have staff who work at the wastewater treatment plant, and they roll all of these costs into what it's going to cost to operate the wastewater treatment. So the assumption was that there was going to be a 10% increase in the cost of hospitalization
That's what I thought.
over
For
the
their
years.
health,
For their
insurance.
healthcare.
Employees, oh, okay.
For the employees.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
that's what I was expecting.
Right, and that's why it shows up like that. Now, I know Mr. Ains forwarded out all of these spreadsheets that are very substantial and very complicated to the entire board, and you know, you're welcome to print all 15 pages of all four of those out, but the calculations can be adapted. So say we get more than 5 REUs, you know, there's a lot of changes that can be made that could help us into the future setting the fees. So this is assuming we get no growth at all, virtually 5 REUs, which is almost nothing. But say we get Green Oak wanting to come in with several hundred units, we would have those connection fees then that would be captured, which is not reflected in this this whole study. But all of those spreadsheets that we got could be all those numbers could be plugged in, and then we would know the impact. So I just thought I'd butt in. I'm sorry. but,
Very true, very true.
more questions?
So this
Go
is just based on nothing happening as of today? Okay.
Well, we know we're losing 17.
Okay. Ms. Beliger.
So page number 8, this is what is recommended for just keeping afloat or something? Is that the main idea, or just keeping the prices in current with inflation? Is that what, to go up from 84 to 87 and 88 to 80 and all that? Is that what this is saying here?
To go from the $84 currently, I think, to 87 if you do
Yes.
the every year approach. And I think if you do the single increase approach, it was
90/20?
90 something, $90.20. So to stay apace with the 3% inflation assumption, the 10% hospitalization, no capital improvements, using the currently projected debt service payments. If you took the approach where we're just going to look at expenses each year and recalculate the number each year, then for the first year it would go up $3 from 84 to 87. Basically, long story short, to keep up with inflation. There's also been a little bit of loss of what we call billable flow over the past few years that the $84 rate was based on. So that also accounts for some of the increase.
Does this particular thing allow for any kind of savings or whatnot at the wastewater plant for any kinds of accumulation for a rainy day, you know, a crisis or an issue?
It does not call for it does not include a line item to set aside funds for a infrastructure reserve fund or for that in terms of saving up for a rainy day. It does not do that. It basically keeps things as they are, pretty much just keeping up with inflation.
Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Zelenock.
So I have a follow-up on that. So for our current customers, does this rate include repair and maintenance? So let's say we have to replace a trunk line. Does this rate include that, or?
This rate includes the assumptions used in setting the expenses. So I think we have in the budget something like $200,000 a year towards capital projects, capital outlays that need to be paid in cash. There isn't a specific line item that says, repair cost for this particular sewer 3 years from now. It's not like that. It can be plugged in.
Right.
But
Right. So do we think this is adequate to maintain our current system in a good or operating shape going forward? So, okay. So that this will maintain what we have in case something happens, replacing items on a scheduled maintenance. Correct. But if we had a catastrophe, this would not cover this. But it would keep our current customers sufficient.
Dan, I think this would be true, that the 200,000 represents an adequate amount for what we can foresee today for the next few years. Recall that we're doing the asset management plan, which will be much more detailed. We're going to look manhole by manhole. And I expect when we get that done in a year, year and a half, we actually will find, once you start looking for things, you find them. So I think when we come back at the end of the asset management plan, we may find that the $200,000 is a little low. But we really don't know that till we get done with that plan.
So would it be the recommendation that we should stay status quo until we see that asset management plan, so we know, if we have to put away more or charge more to maintain our current customers and our current system?
I think 200,000 is the minimum you want to put away for that right now. I think it will rise in the future when we know more. I think it is on the low end.
The 200,000?
I do believe that.
Okay. So do we want to change our models to be a little more realistic?
I can't tell you what the more realistic number is today.
All right. All right.
I will be back in a year, year and a half with that number.
Okay. All right. Can I continue? I have a
Yes,
couple
go
more
ahead.
questions.
Please.
So then if we move, okay, so let's see here. So with the, so moving to, I think, when we go to the basin, we're saying we are going to include those costs for our current customers to pay for future use customers. Because our current customers would not need that, but if we want to build it, then we're charging the current users, we're putting money away for future usage.
I can't speak to the engineering details of that, but as I understand it, that tank is also needed for current customers in order to help safeguard the operation of the plant. So it isn't necessarily an accurate statement to say that that tank is solely for future customers. Current customers during big rainfalls would benefit from having that tank there.
And how many times a year do we have those big rainfalls? And have we asked our current customers if they want to pay this increase to potentially fund it? I mean, how often do we have major rainfalls?
We had one here in March, or
Right.
late February, March, put us in violation of the DNR reports. We could go 2 or 3 years without one, and then we could get 3 or 4 in a row in a spring. You really can't predict those.
Okay.
We've been lucky we haven't been struck with like a 4 or 5 inch rain that other people had. That would really make a mess for us.
Wasn't the last one a problem with a manhole somewhere, though?
Yeah, we had a manhole overflow, but we were still pretty close to capacity before that happened.
Okay, so, and then, okay, I mean, we might want to look at other alternatives to fund the basin. Maybe special assessment districts for those areas that might be using it more than the current ones. So anyway, those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Otto?
So my understanding, would it be safe to say whenever Horseshoe Lake floods, that's when we usually have it almost every year during that time period?
Yeah.
So
But-
after the thaw and in spring, we usually have a lot of
Yeah, but
rainfall.
when our system goes up and we have a heavy flow, it's system-wide. Horseshoe Lake, when it floods, is the worst customer, but in every part of our system, the flow goes up.
Okay.
Ms. Chick?
But my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is it isn't just a heavy rainfall, that there have been several instances during the years where the plant cannot handle the flow and you have to bypass some systems?
Yeah, that's pretty regular that we bypass part of the process.
Mr. Dockett?
Could you tell me when, it seems like this comes down real fast for us, you know. We had a 5-year study. Seems to me like it was only like 3 years. When is the end of our last 5-year study? In other words, when would this have to take place? If we're doing 5-year studies, I hate to have to raise everybody's rates every 3 years. I mean, you know, it just doesn't make sense to me. So, do you know when our last study was put in place?
It's interesting.
I can't hear you.
The last study was April of 2014, so it was 4 years ago. And we looked at that question very hard about how does the current analysis compare to the analysis that was done 4 years ago. What we found were the expenses project extremely closely. What we're projecting as expenses now we're within a few percent of what we projected 4 years ago. What we found is that the billable flow has gone down. The township is collecting, has fewer flow to bill against. We think that's largely due to the correctional facilities demand going down. So if you're selling less wastewater, then the cost of everybody else has to go up a little bit.
Okay.
Well, you didn't answer my question, though. When would this take place? At the end of the 5-year study? Or you want to bring it in right away?
What, a change in rates?
This thing you're talking about. When does it start? I want to know if it starts at the end of our last 5-year study.
We are, everything
Will
we're,
it be before another year, excuse me, are we going to wait for another year? That's the 5-year study.
everything we are projecting starts
I
with-
can't hear you.
Everything we are projecting tonight starts with a July 2018 budget.
Well, that's only a 4 years, son.
Then you can not raise the rates and
Well,
not bring in enough money.
Well,
That's your choice.
well, then, but it's not a 5-year study then if we're doing it in
Okay.
4 years.
Okay.
Okay, and our study very clearly indicates in 2014 to review this data on an annual basis because things change.
Right, right. Did
Very
you have
clear.
any questions? No. Okay, well, my concern is that, part of this is that we haven't, we could have a catastrophic failure like happened in Macomb County. I don't know what the system's like out there. I know you're televising and, doing repairs. The maintenance is ongoing. I'm thankful we have such a good team there at the wastewater treatment plant. But this township hasn't really taken good care of it, I don't believe, over the years, making sure that the money has been set aside for maintenance. And you all know when we get these pumps in, how expensive that is. We've had some of those lately. So I know the money is necessary for operations and maintenance. So I just want to make sure that we're not going to be behind the 8 ball and with this whole thing. I also know that we got this wastewater treatment plant for a song, right, from the state virtually. And so I don't believe our rates have been appropriate for many, many years to build up the kind of fund balance to take care of some of these things should we have a catastrophic failure. So anyway, I am glad that we have these tables now that can be adapted. We can put in however many RUs we anticipate, however many connections we anticipate, and be able to go ahead and adjust our fees appropriately so that we're not going to be stuck with a big expense all of a sudden not anticipated. So I appreciate the work you've put into this, and we'll have time to think about this as a board. I didn't anticipate us making a decision tonight about this, and you can all study the spreadsheets that have been provided, and I know Mr. Ains sent them out to all of you. But think about this carefully. You can put some more questions together, and I'm sure Mr. Brewer will be available, Mr. Cooper-Wasser will be available, and Mr. Ains, Mr. Willis. So we can get more information as the few weeks go by, and then make a decision on what we want to do. Ms. Beliger. Go ahead.
I have something. I brought in a bill a couple weeks ago and I showed it to the treasurer. My first sewer bill was $83. We might have got it for a song, but my first bill was $83, or it was $3.80. Now it is $84.
Okay. Was that 50 years ago, Mr. Dockett?
Yeah,
Okay.
just about that.
Yeah.
I was on the first one. The
Okay.
first run was from the sewer plant to the Whitmore Lake School on Main Street, and and there was no hookup fee. You only paid for the frontage footing. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Manley.
Just, I guess, a comment when we are thinking about this, 'cause I don't think we should decide right now. I mean, we could have a one-time adjustment every year of $35. That's $420 a year. I mean, just think of people's budgets also when we're thinking of this, because to me that's pretty substantial. So,
Oh, that's with the two
yeah,
of them. Yeah.
yeah.
$35. If you break it down to monthly,
$35
a month.
from 84 to 119.
Yeah, 84 to 119, but that's quarterly. So it'd be like,
Oh, yeah, that's true.
yeah.
So $140, but
Yeah, it's substantial. So, there's not necessarily the thought of a $3 million project and a $3 million project. There could be some combination of $3 million, $1 million. We have 2 trunk lines. One we need a $2 million, and the other one we need a $1 million if we were to do anything. So it wouldn't necessarily be $3 million. So that's all adjustable. And then you wouldn't want to do anything if you didn't have any users probably coming online. So we need to think about all the ramifications of what's going on here. And we don't need to make a decision tonight, but we should be thinking about this in the next few months. Ms. Beliger.
And it may be good to also consider, is there a way to, if we're talking about new users coming out, more people in the area, new people hooking up, more users, whatnot, it would be good to not have the old people that are currently online to have to fork out a lot of money for the new users. I don't know how that could be addressed, but perhaps you've had a lot of experience with different aspects helping communities contend with this, as opposed to, in a sense, punishing the current users for the possibility of, or even new people moving in and so forth to the area and using the facilities.
Yeah, it's a classic chicken and the egg issue. Do you build the capacity and then new users come in, or the timing of that? So, I can't say exactly to predict an answer on that in terms of the timing. Because the concept here, and we always try to do this, is that growth will pay for growth. And this baseline study keeps things as they are. It does not account for existing users to pay for growth that isn't due to them. So this study follows the concept of growth paying for growth. And it's a fine line in terms of when to make an improvement. Looking ahead in the crystal ball, what's going to happen in the next 5 years, who's going to connect, what do we need to build to plan for that. So it is a fine line to kind of, basically what you're asking is to predict the future. And we all are in that situation of how can we accurately predict what's going to happen growth-wise 2 years from now, 3 years from now.
Ms. Otto.
On slide 23, you talk about the tap fees. It said it could be higher if the township commits to a capital project. Now, the 6255 is just recommending what we have today. Is there a percentage? So if we're going to do the basin, what would be the tap fee for that? If we were going to do the two projects, what would be the tap fee for that?
It would have to be looked at individually, and the reason is how the capital project is paid for. If the new capital project is paid for with a bond, with debt service, you have to deduct the principal payment each year of that debt service from the connection fee. Because when somebody comes into the system new, they've paid their connection fee, but then to bill them in the quarterly rates for the principal of the new debt would be what we call double dipping. So to answer your question, if the improvement is paid by debt service, we normally do not see a big increase in the connection fee.
Okay.
If the improvement is paid for in cash, $3 million in cash, then there is no debt service on that project that the new user would be paying in their rates because it would have been paid for in cash. And in that case, the connection fee would go up more. And it'd have to be calculated on an individual basis each time you make an improvement to the system.
You've done that thing in your study.
Use the microphone, Mr. Grubel.
He has done that, and it's in the detailed tables that were distributed. Roughly, the single $3 million project would increase. You could go up to $62.90. So we're talking less than $100 difference there. And with the $2-3 million projects, you could go to $63.25.
Okay.
So it's a nominal increase, and that's because the assumption is that the projects are paid for with a bond and not in cash. That's why the increase is minimal.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, can we move on to our agenda?
Yes, except I'd like to say there's only 3 people on this whole board here that's on the sewer. It seems like all the ones that aren't on the sewer are real excited about raising the rates. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. You're on. Yeah, some of them.
I'm on the sewer.
Yeah.
Those two
Right.
and me.
No,
Okay.
I'm on the sewer.
Yep.
Who's on the sewer?
Both of us are.
I said 3 of us.
Okay.
No, we're on the sewer.
Okay.
I said
okay.
only
Okay.
3 of us
Thank you, Mr. Rubel
on
and
this
Mr.
board
Cooperwasser.
are pay the bill. We're not quite as excited as some of the other people, maybe.
Okay. Moving on to our next item on the agenda is Okay, the next item on our agenda is the second call to the public. Would anyone like to come and share their thoughts with us tonight? Please state your name, your address, and you have 3 minutes. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Dale Brewer. I live at 11548 East Shore Drive, Whitmore Lake, Michigan. I'm a member of the sewer district. I live here and participate in it. So I believe I have a little bit of a dog in this fight. I'd like to bring to your attention that Mr. Cooper Wasser has given you a very outdated presentation, incomplete and insufficient. Does not meet the legislative quality and the necessity that it's to be in it to continue with your SAW grants. You're jeopardizing your SAW grants by accepting this and going forward. It does not meet the EPA requirements. You have no, you do not have a capital budget with reserves. You have no replacement reserves. You have no operating reserves. There's no such thing as a true line budget. All of these things are necessary to maintain your SAW grants and to continue to get your refunds. You have applied under this, and that's the purpose of your SAW grant. Please, please, please go back and look at it. Even in his own admission, he writes right in here, we expect that the capital budget will need to increase in future years by a detailed plan because there's no capital improvement study completed. You're a year and a half early on this budget plan before you can actually incorporate it. His whole thing is nothing but a bunch of mishwash. There's also no tables presented in the documents that we received via the other. I don't know if you've got more tables someplace else. You were referring to different tables that demonstrated the expenses. There's references in the plan to tables 10, 11, 12, 13. There's no tables to go with it to support it. It's a very, very incomplete document, and you're jeopardizing your SAW grant. Unfortunately, his 40 years, he's been around for 40 years, he's giving you information that's 20 years old. I'm sorry, I have to criticize the man, but it's a very factual thing. And again, there are other methods. I don't know how you plan to, if you do plan to move forward with the retention pond or the retention tank, how you're planning to finance it. I don't know if those costs have been included in anything that he has here. There's no way to tell. And again, there's no way to show how those costs are going to be incorporated in. Those costs could be also amortized in a future reserve plan so that you have some monies on hand.
15 seconds, Mr.
I'm sorry, I'm
Brewer.
going to
Go
keep
ahead.
going because I'm got to explain this to you because apparently you don't listen. I've told you this before, that you should not be using the same people that are doing your work to do your grants or to do your assessment study. Go to your planner or go to your accountants. They do this study for Green Oak Township. You're going to get accurate details if you go to someone outside of TetraTech. They're not the people, all they're doing is feeding their own mouth. And you really, really got to open up and look at this before you continue to feed them money. You're causing yourself a lot of anguish. Part of the reason you're behind so far is because all you're doing is looking at status quo. I can tell you that $200,000 is going to go out in 2 minutes if you have a major pump failure. I'm appalled that you sit here and look at this. And again, there's a board that was supposed to be created between Northfield Township and Green Oak Township that needs to look at this plan before you can adopt it. There's no board, there's no interaction with Green Oak Township on this. It needs to be done. You've got to bring yourself up to date. Thirdly, and this will be my conclusion here, but you also mentioned the costs for, based on what the assessor was saying, as far as for the, if you change to a limited industrial versus agricultural. He didn't give you a complete explanation, I don't believe, and I'm not trying to criticize you because I think the information he gave you is correct. The taxable value will stay the same and increase based upon the cost of inflation or a maximum of 5% per year. The land values are going to jump up substantially if they're done as agricultural values, but it doesn't affect the taxes. So there is going to be an inequity And there's also some major inequities in the system. I've already talked to him about it, so I'm not throwing him under the bus or anything here. But there's some things, again, as you look at this, so that you don't misinform your public as you're talking back to them. One is going to stay the same and increase accordingly. The other is going to go like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your indulgence. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Anyone else? Good evening.
Good evening, Udo Huff, 6431 Whitmore Lake Road. Thank you very much for your comments. I tried to explain this since many years here, since the beginning of the explanation from Tetra Tech to the board about the sewer district of Whitmore Lake Road. And my wife and I, we, in our fight to stay here in the township and to sustain our property, made even material sources available to the board, which got wiped off from the table, not even looked at. And it is just pathetic that, is this a banana republic or we live in the United States? Is there more companies than just Tetra Tech around to be consulted? I believe so. And if you do not know to support projects, then go out to the public and ask if maybe you can get support how to run projects. Then I'm more than glad to help you out. That's my business, not even to ask and charge you for that. But what's going on here about sewer district? We have to refinance our farm to stay here in the township because of bad decisions made through Tetra Tech and the board. And why is this going to happen to other people as well? It's not necessary. So please change your race, change even in the middle of the race your horse, but go out and shop. There is a lot of stuff you can do. There's a lot of material on the websites from the government, from other sources, and we submitted a bunch of paper and material to you, never looked at. So what's going on here about the sewers district and about the running over tank and what have you? It's just it's a farce. So please correct this, but quick. Thank you.
Thank you. Please send your materials in again. I don't know if I got them originally. Okay, thank you.
Hello, David Gordon, Helena Road. I'll be brief. I live right down the road from the area you're talking about at 23 and Territorial. I live a mile south and a mile west of there. I've heard the supervisor on a number of occasions say that the US 23 corridor is an active area for development, but it's been very vague. And when I see that another $24,000 is being spent for an upgrading of the master plan, and when I read through what McKenna wants to do, it seems like there's a whole lot of things that are just going to be redone. And you were in charge of the 2012 plan. I don't know that your plan is so terribly inadequate that all these things need to be done, but you guys have already voted for that. Out of the $24,500, you've got one public meeting. And you said one of the reasons you wanted to have this adopted, and you made the motion to have this plan, was for more public input. Well, one public meeting may not be enough. And a special assessment district was done down there for $800,000, and now what you see is half the property's up for sale because they can now get more money for their property because it's got sewers. When you talk about light industrial, my question is, again, when you're looking at the master plan, are changes that you're considering ones that are being generated by citizens or outside developers? And I don't hear a bunch of citizens saying, yes, we definitely need to change a bunch of things down in Territorial and bring in limited industrial growth. And I haven't seen a bunch of transparency from you, Madam Supervisor, in terms of, you know, there's references to businesses showing interest on the 23 corridor, but specifically who's coming in, what are they trying to do, where specifically are they trying to do it? I mean, I see a gravel pit taking place across from a business on Territorial right now. I don't think they're zoned for it, and they're already doing it. I mean, is this going to become a de facto industrial area because of lack of enforcement? I have no problem with reviewing the master plan. It's required by the state, but we're spending a lot of money, and it's not really clear what we're spending it for. I would like to see a lot more public input and a more modern approach to reaching out to the public other than simply we post it on our website and hopefully people will come see it. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's see, board member comments. Anyone have anything they'd like to say at this point? Mr. Dockett.
I agree with both Dale and Udo on Tetra Tech. They're the only people that's ever done sewers here for 50 years. This board has given them no bid contracts. Just whatever they say they gotta have, this board votes for it. What do you expect? They're gonna just rip us off every time when for 50 years we've done it? I mean, you know, let's get real here. Next thing, I'd like to have you buy and use local services and stores. Happy Easter. And I think we should mention that we're going to be closed Friday, half a day. I think we should have that. I don't know what's on the web or not, but we should certainly mention it here at the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Manley.
Just again, happy Easter, and thanks to the public for their comments. And as far as the sewer cost and the SAW grant, Mr. Brewer, I'll definitely look into that. Kind of an interesting concept, so I value your opinion. And that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I'd just like to thank everybody for coming and making their comments. Maybe we could have our township manager, either at this meeting or maybe the next one, comment on the SAW grant. I know he's been following it closely to make sure we're in compliance, so maybe we could have an update on that.
Okay. Ms. Beliger.
I do want to thank the members of the public for commenting tonight and coming out to the meeting, and thank you for bringing some important things that we should look into, Mr. Brewer. I appreciate that. And like the other board members, wish everybody a really wonderful, happy Easter.